I want to talk about two intertwined subjects this morning: the future of Westside UUC and of the Unitarian Universalist Association. More specifically, I want to concentrate on the philosophical direction that will directly affect these two futures. This subject is an important one that has had and has now more than ever great importance on the future of Unitarian Universalism. It has recently been brought to the forefront by a book written by Michael Werner called Regaining Balance, which has been read and discussed by several of our members on our church's online forum. I personally think this book is long overdue and sorely needed, and I hope it will have a dramatic influence on the future of UUism. I want to thank Myron Ice for bringing this book to my attention, for it expresses serious concerns that I have held for many years. Mr. Werner recounts the reverse movement of our religion toward the more spiritual direction since the 1960s, and makes the argument that that is the wrong direction, especially now that there is a tidal wave of secularism running across the nation. I want today to expand on that argument positively, and instead of withholding the words of light-hearted amusement usually saved by speakers toward the end of a reflection, which may sorely be needed sometimes, I shall bring this attempt now, for it is pertinent to the reflection. It is a poem by a UU from Montclair, New Jersey, Mr. Ted Mooney, entitled The UU Blues. It goes like this. God, give me a break. Tell me if you're here. You listening through some big merciful ear? Or are we all alone on this little sphere? I'm wondering what you are, and if you are, and where you are on this little blue star. Because I've got them open-minded, searching, growing, wondering, Unitarian Universalist blues. Other religions, they got their minds made up, while I ask all the questions one by one. So how come they got all the answers and I got none? They go around converting souls. It must be so exciting. All I ever convert is empty bottles at recycling. They go around Jerusalem trying to cure the blind, while I go through my hymn book, crossing out the words mankind. A simple yes or no will do, big friend. Is there a gold castle in the sky, or is this the end? Life's mystery is great, but I can only stretch it so far, and I'm wondering what you are, and if you are, and where I are on this little blue star. Because I got them open-minded, searching, growing, wondering, Unitarian Universalist blues. Okay, I shall begin by repeating a little history, especially for newcomers to UUism. Very briefly, both religions were Christian. Unitarians separated back in the year 325, when at a year-long council in Nicaea, they were voted out for not accepting the creed that Jesus was divine, but instead was simply a great human being, and that there was no such existence as a Trinity. Universalists could never accept the existence of a hell, believing that God would never have created such an evil place. Otherwise, they were Christian. The two denominations, because both were more liberal than the main line of Christianity, and because both were gradually losing membership, merged in the year 1961. What I will say now may seem vainglorious, and perhaps it is, but I think UUs who are not aware would be pleased to know this, and in fact I think they should. I think we should know this. Over the history of the United States, 102 Americans have been elected to the Hall of Fame of Great Americans. You can read all about this hall by Googling it on your computer. Of those 102, 24 were avowed Unitarians, and 7 were Unitarian in belief but never admitted it. Lincoln, Franklin, Mark Twain among those. Now that's 31 out of 102. These 102 great Americans who make up this group were ahead of their times, were contributors to the advancement of science, medicine, law, education, decency, and general improvement of life in this country and elsewhere. And as you can see, this ratio of Unitarian inclusion to U.S. population is incredibly out of proportion. About the year 1913, a new Unitarian minister named John Dietrich, whom I quoted in the reading, first began using the term humanism to identify his non-theistic philosophy of religion to the Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. He has been dubbed the father of religious humanism by a widely used encyclopedia of religion. He and another Unitarian minister, Curtis Reese, along with philosopher John Dewey, got together in 1931 with 31 other Unitarian ministers and one Universalist minister, and they created the Humanist Manifesto, the major propositions of religious humanism. This group went on to form the American Humanist Association, the AHA. The first 5 presidents of the AHA were Unitarian ministers. From that time on, Unitarianism and humanism began to come together, especially in the Midwest and Western states, and their numbers increased. Along about 1967, however, UU membership began a precipitous decline, falling from a high of 281,000 to a low of 171,000 in 1982. Through the liberal Protestant denominations, or though the liberal Protestant denomination suffered severe membership losses over the same period, which averaged 20%, the UU's staggering 40% decrease appeared to threaten extinction. Michael Werner writes in his book, I'll Be Blunt, UUism is dying. If he is right, and I agree with him, the numbers prove it, I think, why isn't that true of our church, Westside? Because I feel sure our members are predominantly humanists. We were more humanist in the beginning, and our outstanding minister, who was so responsible for the success and growth of our church for the last 6 years or so, is a humanist. So, my prediction for the future of our church is solidly positive. I wish, however, I could feel the same optimism for the fate of the denomination as a whole. I am afraid that 40 years of religious regression and ministerial training that they're getting today, plus the allure for ministers of the greater influence made possible, their greater influence, made possible by alliance with the supernatural, these factors may be insurmountable. Michael Werner, in his book, Regaining Balance, writes that, quote, UUism has been taken over by a narrow ideology of toleration. The historical focus on rational religion has been abandoned, and the lack of purpose and focus is resulting in a sharp decline in membership. A major point he makes is that the UUA's stated goal is focused on inclusiveness. While the number one reason people belong to the UUA is to be with like-minded people, a totally normal human response. Why then do we try to be so inclusive, so all things to all people? Why promote an indiscriminate pluralism which is blind to the evils which affect the body politic and obstruct consideration of the sorts of thoroughgoing social revisions which may be needed to remedy many evils. Euripides' dictum that humanity's most valuable trait is a judicious sense of what not to believe appears to have been forgotten. Unquote. 17 years or so ago, I joined this church with its 50 or 60 members immediately after it had hired its first minister, of course part-time. I had been a member of the original Unitarian Church of Fort Worth and then a charter member of the Jefferson Church, from which my wife and I had resigned after 6 or 7 years. Soon after joining Westside, its new minister gave a sermon in which he made this statement, that anyone who does not believe in the existence of a higher power is arrogant. In the first national meeting of the Unitarian Universalist Christian Fellowship in New Orleans back in 1999, he was either the leader or the reporter, I have never been sure, of a meeting, and he wrote of it, it featured a full day of workshops on prayer and spiritual practice. The Eucharist was offered twice, and there was a healing service and a baptism service. Part of it was keeping alive our history as UU Christians and returning to the roots of our faith. And in the baptismal service, they baptized 6 Unitarians. The principal and repeated aim of Sam, the minister, was to return UUism to the roots of Unitarianism, back to the historical traditions of 150 years before. He wrote of this returning in these words, quote, I think this spiritual renewal can make us into the postmodern church in the 21st century, accepting a newfound diversity and provide a forum for expression of an enlightened Christianity. Unquote. I'm sorry, but that sentiment of returning to the past, the highest development of Christian theology at that time, seemed absurd to me. To the 19th century, how likely is it that the thinking of those giants of intellect and humanitarianism would not have been affected and changed were they alive today, considering the incredible advancements in science, psychology, medicine, the social sciences? Certainly they were not. They were not saying, let's go back 100 years to the ideas of that day, of 1750. No, the roots of Unitarian Universalism are not the comprehensions and assumptions of hundreds of years ago. Our roots lie in the magnificent, open-minded, and unceasing quest for truth, which did not climax in 1840, or will today, or ever. What UUism needs is more leaders like Emerson, Channing, and Parker, women and men who are ahead of their time, who were not intent on soul-searching or on saving grace, or of excessive tolerance that leads to passive acceptance of irrational beliefs, but on the best and quickest means of improving mankind's freedom, health, safety, and happiness on this earth in present time. Sam praised postmodernism quite often, and this concept is one that has grown strongly in Boston, the headquarters of the UUA. I wasted several hours of my life at that time attempting to find a definition of this word, one that I could understand. Finally, I came to the conclusion that it really meant that old opinions and ideas were really best, after all, and it was best to return to them. But it wasn't until much later I read Richard Dawkins' book, A Devil's Challenge, and discovered a welcome and assuring comment. He wrote, it is my belief that the word postmodernism means nothing at all except in restricted context of architecture where it originated. I recommend the following practice. Whenever anybody uses the word in some other context, stop them instantly and ask in a neutral spirit of friendly curiosity what it means. Never once have I heard anything that even remotely approaches a usable or even faintly coherent definition. The best you'll get is a nervous titter and something like, "Yes, I agree. It's a terrible word, isn't it? But you know what I mean." "Well, no, actually I don't." Unquote. Another warning sign of the UUA has been the hugely expensive experience of the Pathways Church in South Lake, which was oriented toward mainstream Christianity and proved to be a failure, even with the unlimited money expended for it by the UUA. The Reverend Mr. Dwight Brown, who came to Westside for a year or two after he had resigned and retired as the director of the Southwest Conference of the UUA and as longtime minister of the Dallas Church, confided to me from the very beginning of that experience that he felt the UUA should have better invested their money in Westside UU. Yet another example of the UUA's skewed direction has played out right here in Fort Worth. 5 years ago, the First Jefferson Church had several hundred members, and Westside 60 or 70. At that time, the Jefferson minister proudly proclaimed himself to be a Christian. 5 years after that, Jefferson had lost so many members that he could not make mortgage payments on his facility or continue to employ the minister, and had fewer than 100 members, while the West Side had more than 200 and is still growing. I hope Michael Werner's book has not come too late. It could not be more obvious and apparent that free thinking is exploding in this country. I could list the numerous polling facts and figures, but I won't bore you with that. Suffice it to say that the U.S. is finally following the trend begun in Europe many years ago, away from Christian orthodoxy and moving with increasing speed toward greater humanism. There has been no better time for satisfying the new desire for reason and connection in the world. If the UUA had not reversed its direction in the 1960s, our denomination would now be enjoying its greatest growth than ever before. Werner is aware of that and is initiating, however late, what should become a real overhaul of UUA thinking. Let us hope so. For someone, that's me, who has experienced the intolerance, the persecution, the self-debasement, and the irrationality of Orthodox churches, and who clings tenaciously and with great appreciation to the lone oasis that is our church, of reason and of thinking people. It has been one of the richest discoveries for dragging deserters from orthodoxy. The gratifying absence of sacraments and ceremony based on dogmatic creed has long been a cause for joy. But over the years, I have seen in the Southwest a growing likeness in many of our services to the mainline Christian churches. I feel, as many others, that advantage is being taken of UU tolerance by some of our ministers, and especially of the UUA. Their Christian theology seems to be more important than consideration of the progress made possible during the advancement of humanist thought. To begin again to practice the rituals of Eucharist, healing, and baptism is an embarrassment and contradiction of UUism. It makes one wonder why persons who cling to this age-old theology do not commit to a Trinitarian church. Why join a long-established liberal religion to make it something else? To make it almost its opposite. The last point I want to make is another argument dealing with tolerance, and that is the words to the famous old song, Amazing Grace. I know how beautiful the music is, and how it stirs memories that are very pleasing. And I recognize that much opposition to it may be emotional or overreaction, perhaps to unpleasant memories. But I argue the lyrics cannot or should not be ignored. More than any religion I am familiar with, ours is one that has been constructed on reason. We recite in our affirmation, the quest of truth is our sacrament, to seek knowledge and freedom. These quests are not easy, especially have they not been in the past. Lives were sacrificed to earn those freedoms. To pass knowledge on, not just religious knowledge, but all knowledge, euphemism and vagueness. It is necessary to use better language. Amazing grace. What does grace mean in this sense of theology? American Heritage Dictionary defines it as divine love and protection bestowed freely on people in the state of being protected or sanctified by the favor of God. How many of us truly believe that grace is our teacher, our personal protector, and that we will be singing God's praise for 10,000 years upon 10,000s more after that? Take away the nostalgia of the innocence and simplicity of childhood, and the singing of this hymn makes no more sense than mersey notes of achy, breaky heart. There are too many hymns that combine both sense and beauty to keep these words alive. I think, or hope, it's the music and not the words that retains its fascination and comfort. If that's the case, I offer other words that would be in more accord with UU thinking. And I shall end by asking Dan or Ed to come up and lead this closing hymn. You will find on page 205.